I inherited $8 million from a distant uncle and decided to tell no one. On Christmas Day, my mother-in-law told me, "You aren't welcome at our party. You smell like poverty." My husband agreed. Actually, she's right. I simply smiled. Instead of reacting, I booked a flight. When they saw my photos from Greece, I had 45 missed calls. My name is Amelia, and I'm 38 years old. For 14 years, I believed I was building a life with a man who loved me. For 14 years, I made excuses for his coldness, his mother's cruelty, and the slow erosion of everything I thought I was. But 3 weeks before that Christmas, I received a letter that would change everything. A letter that would reveal not just my fortune, but the true nature of every person I had trusted with my heart. Thank you for being here. This story isn't easy to tell, but knowing you're listening makes it easier. Stay with me until the end, and if you want, let me know where you're from in the comments. I'm curious how far these words will travel. The letter came on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between credit card offers and a grocery store circular. The return address was a law firm in Boston I had never heard of, Henderson, Whitmore and Associates. The envelope said in elegant, raised lettering. I almost threw it away, thinking it was some kind of scam or solicitation. But something made me pause. Something made me slide my finger under the flap and pull out the heavy, cream-colored paper inside. "Dear Mrs. Amelia Thornton," it began, "we regret to inform you of the passing of Edward Marcus Whitfield, your great-uncle on your maternal side. As the sole named beneficiary in his last will and testament, you are entitled to the full inheritance of his estate, valued at approximately $8 million. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. $8 million. $8 million. The numbers seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a movie. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling, and read the letter again from the beginning. Uncle Edward. I hadn't seen him in almost 15 years, not since my wedding. He had been the only one from my mother's side of the family to attend. My parents had both passed by then, and the extended family had scattered to the winds. I remember him sitting in the 3rd row, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes kind but somehow sad as he watched me walk down the aisle toward Richard. He had pressed an envelope into my hand at the reception, his grip surprisingly strong for a man in his 70s. "For your future," he had said quietly, his voice barely audible over the band. "When you need it most." Inside was a check for $5,000. Richard had scoffed when he saw it later that night, as we were opening our wedding gifts in our honeymoon suite. "That's it? I thought your family had money. My mother said your uncle was loaded." I had defended Uncle Edward, feeling a flush of shame that I didn't fully understand. I explained that he was a quiet man, a retired professor who had never married, that he lived simply in a small house in Maine, surrounded by books and his beloved garden, that he had never cared about showing off wealth or impressing anyone. Richard had rolled his eyes. "Sounds like a loser to me. My family's accountant makes more than that in a month." I had let the comments slide, as I let so many of Richard's comments slide in those early days. I was young and in love, and I told myself that his sharpness was just honesty, his criticism just high standards. I didn't recognize then what I would come to understand over 14 years of marriage. Richard didn't see people. He saw assets. And people without visible assets were worthless to him. After the wedding, I had sent Uncle Edward a thank you card and a photograph from the ceremony. He had responded with a handwritten note telling me how beautiful I looked and how much my grandmother, his sister, would have loved to see me so happy. I had meant to visit him, meant to keep in touch, but life got in the way. Richard's career, our move to Connecticut, the slow, suffocating process of becoming Mrs. Richard Thornton and forgetting who Amelia Whitfield had ever been. And now, Uncle Edward was gone, and he had left me everything. I sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, reading and rereading the letter and the accompanying documents. The estate was even more impressive than the initial summary suggested. Uncle Edward had owned not just his modest house in Maine, but also a portfolio of investments that had grown quietly over 5 decades. He had lived on a fraction of his income, putting the rest into index funds and bonds and carefully selected stocks. He had never bought a new car, never traveled first class, never owned a piece of clothing that cost more than $50. And all the while, his wealth had compounded in the background, growing and growing until it reached a sum that took my breath away. The documents explained that I was his only beneficiary. His sister, my grandmother, had died years ago. My mother, his niece, had passed when I was 25. There were no other relatives on that branch of the family tree. Just me, just Amelia. There was a personal letter included, separate from the legal documents, written in his careful, elegant handwriting on paper that smelled faintly of old books. "My dear Amelia," it read, "if you're reading this, then I have finally gone to join your grandmother, and I hope she isn't too angry with me for taking so long. I have watched from afar as you navigated a life that seemed to grow smaller with each passing year. I saw the light in your eyes at your wedding, and I saw how it dimmed when you spoke of your marriage at your mother's funeral. You always reminded me of your grandmother, fierce and kind, but too willing to make yourself invisible for the comfort of others. I never told you about my wealth because I wanted to see what you would become without knowing it was waiting for you. I wanted to know that you would find your strength regardless of what was in my bank account. And I believe you will. I believe you already have that strength inside you, buried beneath years of being told you weren't enough. I hope this gift will help you remember who you were meant to be. Use it wisely. Use it to build something beautiful. And remember what I always told you when you were a little girl visiting me in Maine. Never show your cards until you're ready to collect the pot. I love you, my dear. I always have. Say hello to the sunset for me. Your Uncle Edward." I wept. I wept for the uncle I had neglected to visit, the man who had watched over me from afar while I stumbled through a marriage that was slowly destroying me. I wept for the grandmother I barely remembered, the fierce woman whose spirit apparently lived on in me somewhere, buried deep beneath the person I had been forced to become. I wept for my mother, who had died too young to see any of this, who had spent her last years worried about me, but too polite to say so directly. And then I did something strange, something that would prove to be the smartest decision I had ever made. I told no one. I sat there at my kitchen table as the afternoon light faded into evening, and I made a choice. I would not tell Richard. I would not tell Victoria. I would not tell anyone. I called the law firm in Boston and confirmed the inheritance was real. I spoke with a kind woman named Patricia, who walked me through the process of accepting the estate. I signed the necessary documents and had them notarized at a shipping store 3 towns over, where no one knew me. I had the money transferred to a new account at a different bank, First National, not the Bank of Hartford, where Richard and I had our joint accounts. And I changed the password on my email and created a new one specifically for communication with the lawyers. And I waited. I'm not sure why I kept it secret. Perhaps I wanted to grieve Uncle Edward privately before the chaos began. Perhaps some part of me wanted to see how my husband and his family would treat me when they thought I had nothing. A test I wasn't consciously aware I was administering. Perhaps Uncle Edward's words echoed in my mind. Never show your cards until you're ready to collect the pot. Whatever the reason, I said nothing. And Christmas approached like a storm on the horizon. The Thornton family Christmas was always held at Victoria's estate. My mother-in-law had inherited the sprawling colonial mansion from her first husband, a man named Theodore, who had died conveniently young and left her everything. The circumstances of his death had always been somewhat vague. A heart attack, Victoria said, though there were whispers in the family about unusual provisions in his life insurance policy. She had remarried twice more, each husband wealthier than the last, each marriage ending in widowhood. By the time I met her, she was on husband number 4, a sweet, oblivious man named Harold, who seemed to exist mainly to sign checks and stay out of Victoria's way. Richard was her only child from her first marriage, and she had raised him to believe he was royalty. He had attended the best private schools, summered in the Hamptons, skied in Aspen. He had never been told no, never been asked to struggle, never been required to develop the character that comes from facing adversity. By the time I met him in my late 20s, he was a charming, handsome man who knew exactly what to say to make a woman feel special. It took me years to realize that the charm was a mask, the handsomeness, a genetic accident, and the special feeling a manipulation technique he had perfected over a lifetime of getting what he wanted. I had spent 14 Christmases at Victoria's house, each one more miserable than the last. The first few years, I had tried desperately to fit in. I wore the clothes Victoria suggested, always slightly unflattering, I realized later, always designed to make me look out of place. I laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I complimented decorations I found gaudy, and food I found tasteless. I swallowed insults disguised as compliments and smiled through conversations designed to exclude me. Victoria had never approved of me. I came from what she called modest circumstances, meaning my parents had worked for a living and hadn't possessed a vacation home or a stock portfolio. The fact that I had put myself through college and built a career as a graphic designer meant nothing to her. In Victoria's world, you were either born with money or you were nothing. And if you weren't born with money, then marrying into it was the only acceptable path. But that path came with endless debt. You would spend the rest of your life paying for the privilege of sitting at their table. "It's so brave of you," she had said at my first Thornton Christmas, looking at my dress with barely concealed disdain. Wearing something so simple. Richard's last girlfriend always dressed to impress, but I suppose not everyone has that instinct. I had smiled and thanked her, not realizing until years later that I had just been put in my place. Richard had changed over the years too. The charming, ambitious young man I had married had slowly transformed into a sullen, critical stranger. He complained about my appearance. My hair was wrong, my clothes were frumpy, I had gained weight. I hadn't, actually. But he said it so often I started to believe it. He mocked my career, calling graphic design, coloring for adults, and suggesting I get a real job, even though my income had supported us during his multiple failed business ventures. He made small cutting comments about my family, my friends, my hobbies. Nothing big enough to be obviously abusive, but constant enough to wear me down like water on stone. Whenever I confronted him, he would laugh and say I was being too sensitive. "Mom's right," he would say. "You need to develop a thicker skin." I had developed something, all right. I had developed the ability to disappear inside myself, to smile and nod while my mind drifted somewhere far away. I had become a ghost in my own marriage, haunting the edges of Richard's life while he lived at the center of mine. I had forgotten what it felt like to have opinions, preferences, desires. I had become whatever shape was required to fit into the space they left for me. But that Christmas would be different. That Christmas, I had $8 million in the bank and a growing suspicion that my marriage was a lie. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Victoria's house blazed with lights and warmth, every window glowing golden, every surface draped with expensive decorations. The sound of carols and laughter spilled out into the cold December night, and I could see shadows moving behind the frosted glass. The Thornton clan gathering for their annual celebration of wealth and status. I had dressed carefully for the evening. Not too fancy, not too plain. The kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention or criticism. A navy blue dress I had owned for 3 years. Sensible heels, minimal jewelry. The kind of outfit I had been wearing for 14 years, designed not to impress, but to avoid offense, to be invisible. Richard barely looked at me as we walked up the long driveway, our feet crunching on the freshly salted path. He was texting someone, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone screen, his attention completely absorbed by whoever was on the other end of the conversation. I caught a glimpse of the name at the top of the message thread, Jenny. A heart emoji next to her name. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Not tonight. I would deal with it later. I would deal with everything later. Who's Jenny? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Richard's thumb paused over the screen. What? Jenny, on your phone. Who is she? Nobody, just someone from work. He shoved the phone into his pocket and picked up his pace, putting distance between us. Come on, we're late. You know how Mom gets. I did know how Mom got. Victoria had a particular talent for making lateness feel like a capital crime, even when the lateness was only 5 minutes and the party was scheduled to last 6 hours. I had once arrived at a Thornton event 12 minutes behind schedule, and Victoria had greeted me with a 45-minute lecture on the importance of respecting other people's time. The house was packed with Thorntons. Richard's aunts and uncles, his cousins and their spouses, their children running wild through the formal rooms while harried nannies tried to corral them. Great aunts I had met once a year for 14 years and still couldn't tell apart. Business associates who had somehow become family friends. The occasional celebrity or politician who had been invited to add glamour to the proceedings. Victoria presided over it all from her position by the grand fireplace, dressed in red velvet that probably cost more than my car, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists and ears. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, her sharp eyes tracking every guest, cataloging every interaction, filing away ammunition for future use. Her eyes found me the moment I walked in, and her lip curled almost imperceptibly. The expression lasted only a fraction of a second. She was far too practiced to let her disdain show publicly. But I saw it. After 14 years, I had become an expert in reading Victoria's micro-expressions. Those tiny tells that revealed what she really thought beneath the gracious hostess mask. Amelia, she said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced precision. How nice you came. Merry Christmas, Victoria, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Thank you for having us. The house looks beautiful. She turned away without responding, already greeting someone more important. One of Richard's cousins, who had recently been promoted to partner at a prestigious law firm. I stood there for a moment, frozen in the social no-man's land that Victoria had perfected the art of creating. Not welcomed, not dismissed, just present, like a piece of furniture that nobody had gotten around to throwing out. Richard had disappeared into the crowd the moment we entered, pulled away by his cousin Bradford to discuss some investment opportunity that was definitely going to triple our money by March. I was alone, as I always was at these gatherings, alone in a room full of people who looked through me like I was made of glass. I drifted through the party like a specter, making small talk with people who clearly wished they were talking to someone else. I complimented decorations no one cared to discuss. I offered to help in a kitchen that didn't want me. We have staff for that, dear, one of the aunts said, patting my hand like I was a confused child. I smiled until my face ached and nodded until my neck was stiff. At some point, I found myself standing by the window in the library, looking out at the snow falling softly on the manicured lawn. The room was quieter than the rest of the house. Most guests preferred the main rooms where the action was, and I had retreated here to catch my breath. The snow was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, each flake catching the light from the windows as it fell. You look lost, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Richard's Aunt Patricia, one of the few Thorntons who had always been marginally kinder to me. She was Victoria's younger sister, though you wouldn't know it to look at them. Where Victoria was sharp and polished, Patricia was soft and slightly rumpled. She taught art history at a community college, which Victoria considered as a waste of a perfectly good Thornton education. Patricia was holding 2 glasses of champagne and offered one to me with a sympathetic smile. Just thinking, I said, accepting the drink gratefully. The champagne was excellent. Of course it was. Nothing at a Thornton party was anything less than excellent. and the bubbles fizzed pleasantly on my tongue. Dangerous activity at a Thornton party, Patricia said with a dry smile. Better to drink and nod. That's my strategy. Has been for 40 years. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the snowfall. It was strange to feel anything resembling peace at one of these events. But Patricia had always had that effect on me. She asked real questions and listened to the answers. She remembered things I had told her years ago. She was, in short, nothing like her sister. You know, Patricia said quietly, almost casually, Edward Whitfield passed away last month. Your great-uncle, I believe? On your mother's side? I nearly choked on my champagne. The bubbles went up my nose and I coughed, eyes watering. Patricia waited patiently while I recovered. How did you know that? I managed to ask. His obituary was in the Boston papers. I recognized the name from your wedding. He was that distinguished-looking gentleman in the third row, wasn't he? The one who seemed so proud of you. Patricia gave me a searching look. Victoria mentioned it to Richard, but he didn't seem particularly interested. I'm sorry for your loss. My mind was racing. Victoria knew about Uncle Edward's death, which meant she had probably researched him, which meant she might know about the inheritance, which meant, there you are. Richard's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. He was standing in the doorway of the library, his expression tight, his shoulders tense. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite identify. Irritation, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Mom wants to see you in the kitchen, now. The way he said it made my stomach clench. There was no warmth in his voice, no pretense of politeness. This was a summons, not a request. I handed my champagne glass to Patricia, who took it with an expression of concern. Is everything all right? She asked, looking between me and Richard. Fine, Richard said curtly. Just family business. You understand? He took my arm, too firmly, his fingers pressing into my flesh through the fabric of my dress, and steered me out of the library. I looked back at Patricia as we left, saw her standing by the window with 2 glasses of champagne and a worried frown. We walked through the party, past the glittering Christmas tree that stood 15 feet tall in the main foyer, past the table laden with catered food that no one seemed to be eating, past clusters of guests who parted for us like the Red Sea. Richard's grip on my arm never loosened. He was walking fast, forcing me to keep up, and I could feel the attention of the room following us. The kitchen was through a swinging door at the back of the house, a vast professional space with marble counters and commercial appliances, and enough copper pots to stock a restaurant. When we entered, the catering staff looked up in surprise. Out, Victoria said from her position by the center island. All of you, now. The staff scattered like startled birds, abandoning trays and utensils and half-prepared hors d'oeuvres. Within 30 seconds, the kitchen was empty except for Victoria, Richard, and me. Victoria stood by the center island with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold fury. The diamonds at her throat caught the light and glittered like ice. She looked beautiful and terrifying, like a dragon in designer clothing. Close the door, she said. Richard closed it behind us. I heard the click of the lock. Victoria, I began, my voice sounding thin and strange in the sudden silence. Is something wrong? Wrong. She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the marble surfaces. Wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong, Amelia. I have spent 14 years watching my son waste his potential on you. 14 years watching you drag him down with your mediocrity, your lack of ambition, your pathetic little career coloring pictures for other people's businesses. I stood frozen, unable to speak. The words hit me like physical blows, each one precise and devastating. 14 years, Victoria continued, her voice rising, of tolerating your presence at family functions, pretending you belong here when everyone knows you don't. 14 years of watching you sit at my table, drink my wine, benefit from my family's connections, while contributing nothing, absolutely nothing in return. I don't understand, I whispered. What have I done? What have you done? It's what you haven't done. You haven't given me grandchildren. You haven't supported my son's career. You haven't brought anything of value to this family. You're a placeholder, Amelia. A warm body Richard settled for because he was young and foolish and didn't know any better. I looked at Richard, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say something, anything, to stop this. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching the scene with an expression I couldn't read. Do you know what people say about you? Victoria continued. They pity Richard. They wonder why he married so far beneath him. They ask me what he possibly sees in a woman with no family, no connections, no money, no style. And do you know what I tell them? I tell them he was young and foolish. I tell them he made a mistake. Richard, I said, my voice cracking, are you going to... Let Mom finish, he said. His voice was flat, cold, like I was a stranger. Victoria stepped closer to me, and I could smell her perfume, heavy and cloying like flowers at a funeral. Let me make this very clear, Amelia. You are not welcome at my party. You are not welcome in my home. You smell like poverty, and I am tired of pretending otherwise. The words hung in the air between us. You smell like poverty. Something inside me shattered. Not broke, shattered. Into 1,000 tiny pieces that would never fit together the same way again. I turned to look at Richard, my husband, the man I had loved for 14 years, the man I had built my life around, sacrificed for, diminished myself for. He shrugged. Actually, she's right, he said. Maybe you should go home and let us enjoy Christmas. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. I felt myself splitting in two. There was the old Amelia, the one who would have cried, begged, apologized for existing, the one who had spent 14 years trying to earn acceptance that was never going to come, the one who had made herself smaller and smaller until she was nearly invisible. And there was someone else, someone new, someone who had $8 million in a secret bank account and a dead uncle's voice echoing in her head. Never show your cards until you're ready to collect the pot. The new Amelia looked at Richard, really looked at him, for the first time in years. She saw the softness around his jaw that came from a lifetime of easy living. She saw the cruelty in his eyes that she had mistaken for strength. She saw the petulant set of his mouth, like a child denied a second helping of dessert. She saw a man who had never truly loved her. A man who had married her because she was easy to control. A man who had spent 14 years making her feel small because he himself was so very, very small. And she smiled. It wasn't a forced smile. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't the smile of a woman fighting back tears or trying to placate her attackers. It was a genuine smile, spreading across her face like sunrise breaking over mountains. A smile of pure, crystalline clarity. You're right, I said. My voice was calm, steady. It didn't sound like a voice that had just been eviscerated. It sounded like the voice of someone who had finally woken up from a long, terrible dream. You're absolutely right, Victoria. I don't belong here. I never did. Victoria blinked, clearly expecting tears or protests. She had delivered this speech, or versions of it, many times before, to servants and employees and people she considered beneath her. They always reacted the same way, with shock, with hurt, with the desperate scramble to appease her. My calm smile was not part of the script. Well, she said, recovering quickly, at least you're finally seeing sense. Harold can call you a cab. That won't be necessary. I smoothed my hands down the front of my navy blue dress, the dress I would never wear again, and took a breath of the kitchen's cool, lavender-scented air. I have my own car, and I know exactly where I'm going. I turned and walked to the door. Richard stepped aside, automatically, confusion flickering across his face. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. Where do you think you're going? Victoria called after me, her voice sharp with surprise. I didn't answer. I walked through the party, past the staring relatives who fell silent as I passed, past the glittering decorations that now looked tawdry and desperate, past the life I had wasted on people who had never deserved a moment of my time. My heels clicked on the marble floor. My head was high, my eyes were dry. I found my coat in the closet by the front door. A sensible black wool coat that Victoria had once called very practical. I put it on. I found my purse where I had left it on the hall table. Richard caught up with me at the door. His face was flushed, and he looked almost concerned, or as close to concerned as he was capable of looking. "Amelia, what are you doing? You can't just leave." "Watch me. You're being dramatic. Mom didn't mean..." She meant every word. I looked at him, and I saw him flinch from whatever he saw in my eyes. And so did you. I opened the front door. The cold December air rushed in, carrying snowflakes that melted on my cheeks like tears I wasn't crying. "If you walk out that door," Richard said, "don't expect me to come after you." I looked at him one last time. This man I had loved. This man I had wasted 14 years trying to please. "I don't," I said, and I walked out into the snow. The cold air felt like freedom. Each breath was sharp and clean, scraping away the years of suffocation. My car was parked at the end of the long driveway, a practical sedan that Victoria had sneered at and Richard had refused to be seen in, and I walked toward it with steady steps, my heels leaving small holes in the fresh powder. I didn't drive home. I drove to the airport. It was Christmas night, and the terminal was nearly empty. A few stranded travelers slumped in plastic chairs, their faces lit by phone screens, waiting for delayed flights or canceled connections. A janitor pushed a mop across the gleaming floor in slow, methodical strokes. Holiday music played softly from hidden speakers, incongruously cheerful. Silver bells, followed by "Let It Snow," while the departure boards flickered with cancellations and delays. I walked up to the first-class ticket counter and smiled at the tired woman behind it. She was wearing a Santa hat slightly askew, and her name tag said, Denise. "I need a flight to Athens," I said. "Tonight, or as close to tonight as possible." Denise looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Athens? Greece?" "Yes." "Ma'am, it's Christmas night. Most flights are booked solid, and half of them have been canceled because of the snow. Athens is..." She typed something on her computer, frowning at the screen. "That's a very long way away." "I have time." She typed for several more minutes, her frown deepening. "There's a red-eye to London leaving in 2 hours with a connection. To Athens tomorrow morning. First class is available, but ma'am, I have to warn you, it's very expensive. Last-minute international travel on Christmas is..." "I'll take it." She quoted me a price that would have made me faint a month ago. It would have been unthinkable. 3 months' salary for a flight I hadn't planned to a destination I had only dreamed about. I handed her my new credit card, the one linked to the account Victoria and Richard knew nothing about, and watched her process the transaction without flinching. "Window seat," I said. "Please." Denise handed me my boarding pass with an expression of bemused respect. Whatever she saw in my face, it was clearly something unexpected. "Merry Christmas, ma'am. Have a safe flight." "Thank you." I took the pass and looked at it for a long moment. My name printed in capital letters. A flight number, a destination, a future. I intend to. As I walked toward the security checkpoint, I pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls already, Richard's number appearing over and over, with a few from numbers I recognized as belonging to various Thornton relatives. I silenced the phone and put it back in my pocket. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them realize, perhaps for the first time, that I was not as passive and controllable as they had always believed. Security was nearly empty, and I passed through quickly. The gate area was quiet, populated by a handful of other travelers who had ended up here on Christmas night for their own mysterious reasons. A businessman in a rumpled suit, sleeping with his mouth open. A young couple holding hands, their backpacks suggesting a European adventure. An elderly woman reading a paperback novel, a cup of airport coffee steaming beside her. I bought myself a glass of wine at the bar near the gate and sat by the window watching planes take off and land in the snowy darkness. The wine was mediocre and overpriced, but I didn't care. I was drinking it with my own money, in my own time, on my own terms. My phone buzzed again. Richard. I let it go to voicemail. The boarding announcement came, and I gathered my things and walked down the jetway. The flight attendant welcomed me aboard with a warm smile. First class is to the left, Mrs. Thornton. And I settled into my seat with a sense of unreality. The leather was soft. The champagne was cold. The future stretched out before me like an endless ocean of possibility. As the wheels left the ground, I pulled out my laptop and opened a browser. I typed in a search. Luxury hotels for sale, Santorini, Greece. Uncle Edward had always talked about Santorini. I remembered sitting in his small, book-filled study in Maine when I was a child, looking at photographs he had taken decades before. White buildings cascading down cliffsides. Blue-domed churches silhouetted against even bluer skies. Sunsets that painted the world in colors that didn't seem possible. You should see it someday. Amelia, he had said, his voice soft with memory. Promise me you'll see it before you're too old to climb all those stairs. I had promised. And now, finally, I would keep that promise. The search results loaded, and I began to scroll through listings. Villas for rent, restaurants for sale, boutique hotels with impossibly beautiful views. My eyes stopped on one listing in particular, Villa Aegean, a 12-room boutique hotel with panoramic views of the caldera. The photos showed white walls and blue shutters, a terrace overlooking the sea, rooms decorated with simple elegance. The asking price was $2.3 million. I bookmarked the listing and closed my laptop. Outside the window, the clouds were silver and gold in the moonlight. Below me, America was falling away. Connecticut and Victoria and Richard and 14 years of diminishment, all shrinking to nothing as the plane climbed higher. Ahead was Greece and sunshine, and the beginning of something new. You smell like poverty, Victoria had said. I smiled in the darkness of the airplane cabin. She had no idea what I smelled like, but soon, very soon, she would find out. The flight to London was smooth, and I slept better than I had in years. The first-class seat reclined into a flat bed, and the flight attendants kept the cabin dark and quiet. I dreamed of white buildings and blue water and my uncle's kind eyes. I woke as we began our descent into Heathrow, the gray winter morning of England visible through the small window. I had a 4-hour layover before my connection to Athens, and I used the time wisely. I found the airport's business lounge, my first-class ticket granted access, and ordered a proper English breakfast. Eggs, bacon, sausage, baked beans, toast, and a pot of strong tea. I hadn't eaten since the handful of hors d'oeuvres I had managed at Victoria's party, and I was starving. While I ate, I made calls. The first was to Marcus Antonitis, a Greek attorney whose name I had found in my research on the flight over. He specialized in international asset protection and real estate transactions, and his reviews were uniformly excellent. His voice was calm and professional when he answered, with a slight accent that I found immediately reassuring. Mrs. Thornton, he said, how can I assist you? I'm flying into Athens this afternoon, I said. I need help with several matters. Real estate acquisition in Santorini, asset protection across international borders, and, I paused, choosing my words carefully, potentially, divorce proceedings. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was gentler. I see. I can meet you in Santorini tomorrow morning, if that works for your schedule. I have an office in Fira, but I can also come to wherever you're staying. I haven't booked accommodation yet. May I suggest the Mystique Hotel in Oya? It's private, luxurious, and the staff are extremely discreet. I can make a call and secure you a suite if you'd like. Please. And Mrs. Thornton? He paused. Whatever has brought you to Greece on such short notice? You've called the right person. I've helped many women in complicated situations. You're not alone. Something in his voice made my eyes sting with tears I refused to shed. Not here, not yet. Thank you, Mr. Antonitis. Marcus, please. I'll see you tomorrow. I ended the call and stared out the lounge window at the planes taking off and landing. I had been alone for 14 years while surrounded by people. Now I was literally alone, thousands of miles from everyone I knew, and somehow I felt less lonely than I had in over a decade. My phone buzzed. Another missed call from Richard. Another voicemail I didn't listen to. Let him wait. The flight to Athens was shorter, and by early evening I was landing in Greece. The air was warmer than I expected, soft and salt-tinged even at the airport. I took a taxi to the domestic terminal and caught the last flight of the day to Santorini, a small propeller plane that bounced through turbulence like a kite in a storm. It was dark when we descended toward the island, but I could see lights twinkling along the cliffs, white buildings glowing in the night like scattered stars. The airport was tiny, almost quaint. A single terminal building, a handful of gates, a baggage carousel that looked like it belonged in a museum. Marcus had arranged for a driver to meet me, a cheerful young man named Kostas, who spoke excellent English and drove with the terrifying confidence of someone who had never encountered a road he couldn't conquer. The drive to Oya took 40 minutes along winding roads that clung to the edges of impossible cliffs. I couldn't see much in the darkness, but I could sense the vastness of the sea somewhere below, could smell the brine and the flowers and something ancient and eternal that I couldn't name. The Mystique Hotel was everything Marcus had promised. A uniformed attendant took my single small bag. I had brought nothing but my purse and the clothes I was wearing, and led me through a maze of white corridors to my suite. The walls were cool and smooth under my fingertips. The air smelled of jasmine and sea salt. The suite was stunning. A private terrace with an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the night sky. A bedroom with crisp white linens and a bed that looked like a cloud. A bathroom with a marble tub big enough to swim in and a shower with more settings than I could count. I walked out onto the terrace and stood there in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of waves crashing against the caldera walls far below. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of Mediterranean herbs and something else, something that smelled like possibility. I was free. For the first time in 14 years, I was truly, completely free. I slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke, the Santorini sun was streaming through the windows, and the view from my terrace made me gasp out loud. The caldera stretched out below me, a vast blue expanse of water, enclosed by dramatic volcanic cliffs. White buildings cascaded down the hillside like frozen waterfalls, their blue domed churches standing out against the impossible azure of the sky. In the distance, I could see other islands. Thracia, the volcanic remnants of Nea Kameni, hazy and golden in the morning light. I ordered room service and ate on my terrace, wrapped in a plush hotel robe that was softer than anything I had ever owned. Fresh fruit, Greek yogurt drizzled with local honey, strong coffee that smelled like heaven. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the ferries cross the caldera and the fishing boats bob in the harbor far below. My phone had been off since I boarded the plane in London. I wasn't ready to turn it on yet. I wasn't ready to face whatever hurricane of rage and manipulation was waiting for me. Marcus Antonitis arrived at noon. He was older than I had expected from his voice. Perhaps 50, with silver hair swept back from a tanned face and kind dark eyes that had seen many things. He wore a well-tailored linen suit in a shade of pale blue that perfectly complemented the Santorini aesthetic, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had traveled the world many times. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His smile was warm but not presumptuous. Everything about him suggested competence, discretion, and a deep well of patience. We sat on my terrace under a white umbrella, shaded from the sun, and I told him everything. The inheritance, the secret, the Christmas humiliation, my suspicions about Richard's fidelity and his family's intentions, my desire to protect my assets and start a new life. Marcus listened without interrupting. taking notes in a small leather notebook with a fountain pen that looked like it cost more than my first car. His expression remained neutral throughout, giving nothing away, but I sensed that he was filing every piece of information, building a picture of my situation that would inform his advice. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "You were wise to keep the inheritance private," he said. "In most American jurisdictions, inherited assets are considered separate property, not subject to division in divorce. But there are ways a spouse can claim rights to those assets if they're commingled with marital funds or if certain documentation is lacking." "I've kept everything completely separate," I said. "Different bank, different accounts. Richard doesn't even know the money exists." "Good. We can strengthen that separation further. Create trusts, establish residency in favorable jurisdictions, structure your holdings to provide maximum protection." He paused, consulting his notes. "You mentioned wanting to purchase property here in Santorini?" "Yes. I saw a listing for a hotel. Villa Aegean." Marcus smiled. The first real smile I had seen from him. "I know it well. 12 rooms, excellent location in Oya. Needs some updating, but structurally sound. The owner is motivated to sell. There's been a family dispute over the estate, and the heirs want to liquidate quickly. I believe you could negotiate a very favorable price." "I want to see it." "Of course. I can arrange a viewing this afternoon if you're not too tired from your journey." "I'm not tired at all." It was true. For the first time in years, I felt awake, alert, alive. We spent the morning reviewing documents and discussing strategy. Marcus explained Greek property law, which was more complex than I had expected, with specific requirements for foreign buyers. He walked me through the tax implications of establishing Greek residency, the benefits and drawbacks of different corporate structures, the timeline for obtaining the necessary permits and licenses. By the time we broke for lunch, I had a clear picture of how to proceed, and a growing sense that I had found exactly the right person to help me do it. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as we finished our meal. Grilled octopus and a salad of fresh tomatoes and feta, accompanied by a glass of crisp local wine. "The hotel viewing. I have access to a colleague's yacht in the harbor. It's the easiest way to reach the property, as the roads in that part of Oya can be quite challenging, and it offers a beautiful perspective of the coastline." "A yacht? Nothing too extravagant, just a convenient mode of transportation." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "And if I may say, you look like you could use an afternoon on the water. The sea has a way of clarifying the mind." I laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that surprised me with its spontaneity, for what felt like the first time in months. "Mr. Antonitis, Marcus, I think you might be exactly what I needed." The yacht was, in fact, somewhat extravagant. A sleek white vessel with polished teak decks and comfortable cushioned seating and a small cabin below that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Marcus piloted it himself, navigating smoothly around the caldera, while I sat at the bow and let the wind whip through my hair. The sun was warm on my face. The water was impossibly blue. The white buildings of Santorini rose above us like a dream made solid. The hotel came into view as we rounded a dramatic cliff face. It was perched on the edge of the caldera, white walls brilliant against the blue sky, with a terrace that seemed to float over the sea. Even from the water, I could see its potential and its problems. The paint was peeling in places. Some of the shutters hung at odd angles. The garden looked overgrown and neglected, but the bones were there. The location was spectacular, and something about it called to me in a way I couldn't explain. "It needs work," Marcus said, cutting the engine so we could drift and observe. "The previous owner let it decline over the past few years. Health problems, I understand. But the structure is solid, the permits are in order, and the view..." He gestured at the panorama before us. "The view is priceless." "How much is he asking?" 2.3 million euros. I believe we can negotiate to 2 million, perhaps less, given the condition and the family's desire for a quick sale. I stared at the hotel, imagining it restored to beauty, imagining myself walking those terrace paths, greeting guests, building something that was entirely my own, something that Victoria Thornton could never touch or diminish or take away. Offer 1.9, I said. Cash. Quick close. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Bold. I like it. We continued around the island, and Marcus pointed out other properties. Restaurants, villas, empty lots with development potential. But my mind kept returning to that hotel on the cliff. Villa Aegean. It felt like destiny. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the sea, Marcus anchored the yacht in a quiet cove. The water was crystal clear, and I could see fish darting among the rocks below. We sat on the deck with glasses of cold white wine, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. May I take a photograph? I asked suddenly. For my records. Of course. I pulled out my phone and turned it on for the first time since leaving Connecticut. The notifications began flooding in immediately. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, emails. A cascade of demands and accusations and manipulations that I ignored entirely. I opened the camera and snapped a picture of the sunset, the wine glass, the deck of the yacht. In the corner of the frame, almost accidentally, Marcus was visible. Just his shoulder and the back of his head, his distinguished gray hair, the elegant cut of his suit. I looked at the photo and smiled. Then I opened Instagram, an account I rarely used, mostly to look at pictures of other people's vacations, and posted the image with a simple caption, "Some sunsets are worth the journey." I turned off the phone again and returned it to my purse. "Should I ask what that was about?" Marcus said, amusement clear in his voice. "Just sending a message," I said, "to some people who need to receive it." The sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Marcus started the engine, and we headed back toward the harbor, the lights of Oya twinkling like earthbound constellations on the cliffs above. That night, I slept deeply again. But this time, my dreams were not of escape. They were of building, of creating, of becoming someone I had never allowed myself to be. I woke early the next morning and finally, reluctantly, turned on my phone. 45 missed calls. The number stared at me from the screen, almost comical in its excess. 45 times, someone had dialed my number and listened to it ring, waiting for me to answer. 45 messages of varying desperation now sat in my voicemail, waiting to be heard. I went through them systematically, taking notes on a hotel notepad. 28 calls from Richard. The progression was almost funny in its transparency. The first few were angry. "Where the hell are you? What kind of stunt is this? Call me back immediately." Then confused. "Amelia, seriously, what's going on? Mom is furious. People are asking questions." Then worried. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? Just let me know you're safe." And finally, pathetically desperate. "Baby, please call me. Whatever happened, we can work it out. I have some ideas about our future, about opportunities." I could hear Victoria coaching him in that last message. The word opportunities wasn't in Richard's vocabulary. 12 calls from Victoria. These were equally transparent. The early messages were furious. "How dare you embarrass us in front of the entire family? Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Then falsely concerned, "We're all so worried about you, dear. Richard is beside himself. Please call and let us know you're safe." And finally, the mask slipping completely, "Richard mentioned your uncle's estate. We should discuss that as a family. I have some thoughts about how to handle things properly." 5 calls from various Thornton relatives, all variations on, "What's happening? Are you okay?" Victoria's beside herself. I read through the text messages next. Richards grew increasingly desperate as my Instagram post spread through his social circle. "Whose yacht is that? Where are you? Who is the man in the picture? Amelia, this isn't funny. People are asking questions. Call me now." Victoria's texts were more strategic. "I may have been too harsh at Christmas. Let's put that behind us. Family is what matters. Please come home so we can sort everything out properly. I laughed out loud, alone in my luxury suite, the sound echoing off the white walls. They knew about the money now. They had clearly done their research on Uncle Edward, discovered the size of his estate, and realized their grave error. The woman they had dismissed as worthless suddenly had value. Or rather, her bank account did. I responded to none of them. Instead, I called Marcus. The owner accepted our offer. He said without preamble, his voice warm with satisfaction. 2.1 million, final price. He wanted to negotiate further, but I reminded him that cash buyers with quick close capabilities are quite rare in the current market. He agreed within the hour. 2.1 million. I sat down on the edge of my bed, suddenly overwhelmed. That's wonderful. We can sign the preliminary contracts today if you're ready. The full closing will take approximately 30 days for due diligence and paperwork, but the property will be legally committed to you as of this afternoon. I'm ready. One more thing. I strongly recommend purchasing in your maiden name. You mentioned wanting to keep your assets separate from your marriage. This would help establish clearly that the property was always intended as separate property, acquired with inherited funds and held independently. My maiden name. I hadn't used it in 14 years. Hadn't heard it spoken aloud since my wedding day. Amelia Whitfield, after my mother's family. Amelia Whitfield, then. Owner of Villa Aegean. Marcus paused. It has a nice ring to it. It did. It sounded like someone I wanted to become. We met at his office in Fira that afternoon, a beautiful white building with blue shutters and a terrace overlooking the caldera. The space was elegant and professional, filled with books and art and the quiet hum of efficient work being done. I signed page after page of documents, initialing where indicated, watching my new signature take shape. Amelia Whitfield. Not Thornton, not anymore. When it was done, Marcus poured 2 glasses of ouzo, and we toasted to my new acquisition. What will you do with it? He asked. Rent it out as a business? Flip it for profit? Move here permanently? I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I think I might want to run it myself. Make it something special, something meaningful. A fresh start? Something like that. That evening, I walked through the streets of Oya alone. The white buildings glowed pink and gold in the sunset light. Tourists posed for photographs on every corner. Couples held hands and gazed at the view. Children ran laughing through the narrow lanes, their voices echoing off the stone walls. I felt anonymous and invisible, and for the first time in my life, that invisibility felt like a gift. I found a small restaurant with a terrace overlooking the sea and ordered dinner. Grilled fish fresh from the morning's catch. Greek salad with tomatoes that tasted like summer. A carafe of local wine. As I ate, I watched the sun set again, painting the sky in colors that made my heart ache with their beauty. And I began to plan. I would go home. I would face Richard and Victoria, but I would not go as the woman they thought they knew. I would go as a predator wearing the mask of prey. I would let them believe they had won. I would let them spring their little trap, and then I would destroy them. The wine was crisp and cold. The fish was perfect. The sunset was magnificent. And Amelia Whitfield, the real Amelia Whitfield, the one who had been buried for 14 years, was finally, gloriously awake. I flew back to Connecticut a week later. First class again, because I could. Because I deserved it. Because the woman who supposedly smelled like poverty was learning to smell like freedom. Richard was waiting at the airport. I saw him before he saw me, standing by the arrivals gate with a bouquet of red roses, scanning the crowd with barely concealed desperation. He had clearly made an effort, a new suit I didn't recognize, his hair freshly cut, his face clean-shaven for the first time in months. He looked like a man auditioning for a role he wasn't sure he could play. When his eyes found me, his face transformed. Relief. Eagerness. Something that almost looked like affection, but that I now recognized as pure, naked greed. Amelia. He pushed through the crowd and wrapped his arms around me, the roses crushed between us. Thank God. I was so worried. I didn't know what to think when you just disappeared like that. Hello, Richard. Where were you? Why didn't you answer your phone? Who was that man in the picture? His questions tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other, and I could hear the real questions underneath them. How much money do you have? Where is it? And how can I get my hands on it? I needed some time alone, I said, carefully extracting myself from his embrace. After what happened at Christmas, I needed to think. His expression flickered, guilt mixed with calculation. About that, Mom feels terrible. She wasn't herself that night. You know how the holidays stress her out. She wants to apologize properly. Does she? We all do. I should never have... He stopped, swallowed, tried again. The words seemed to stick in his throat. I should never have let you leave like that. It was wrong. We need to talk. About us. About everything. About my money, he meant. About Uncle Edward's millions. I smiled. It was the same smile I had given Victoria in her kitchen. The smile of someone who has finally seen the truth. You're right, I said. We do need to talk. Let's go home. The drive back to our house was surreal. Richard chattered nervously the whole way, filling the silence with apologies and promises and plans. He wanted to take me to dinner. He wanted to plan a vacation, just the two of us, anywhere you want. He wanted to talk about our future and new beginnings and getting things back on track. I said very little. I watched the familiar streets pass by outside the window and wondered how I had lived here for so long without really seeing any of it. The bare winter trees, the grand houses with their holiday decorations still hanging limply in the January rain. The life I had built that had never really been mine. Our house looked exactly the same, a handsome colonial on a quiet street decorated with tasteful landscaping and a red front door that Richard had chosen. He had bought it before we married, and it had always felt more like his house than ours. My touches were minimal, easily overlooked. His presence filled every room. Mom's coming over tomorrow, Richard said as we pulled into the driveway, for brunch. She really wants to make things right. I'm sure she does. Inside, I went straight to our bedroom and closed the door. I needed a moment alone, a moment to breathe and prepare. The next few weeks would require all my strength and all my cunning. I could not afford to slip. I sat on the edge of the bed I had shared with Richard for 14 years, and looked around the room. His things dominated every surface. His books, his photographs, his awards, and trophies from prep school and college. His scent was everywhere. That expensive cologne he wore too much of. The particular smell of his hair products. My presence was limited to a single framed photo of my parents on the nightstand and a small jewelry box that had been my grandmother's. I had disappeared in this room. I had become a ghost. But ghosts, I was learning, can haunt the living in unexpected ways. I heard Richard downstairs, rattling around in the kitchen, probably pouring himself a drink and trying to figure out his next move. He thought he was the predator here. He had no idea he was the prey. I pulled out my phone and began my research. I needed to know everything. Every secret Richard had been keeping. Every lie he had told. Every weakness I could exploit when the time came. It took 3 days of careful reconnaissance, but I found it all. The gambling debts came first. Richard had been visiting a casino in Atlantic City for years. Monthly trips that he had told me were business meetings or conferences or golf weekends with clients. The reality was far darker. He had lost spectacularly and consistently, chasing losses with bigger bets, borrowing money to cover his debts, digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole that now measured nearly $900,000. $900,000 in personal loans and credit lines that I had known nothing about. $900,000 hidden from me, from his mother, from everyone who thought they knew him. The affair came next. Her name was Jennifer Ashford, and she was the 29-year-old daughter of one of Victoria's closest friends. They had been seeing each other for 2 years, meeting at hotels, exchanging thousands of text messages filled with promises and complaints and plans for their future together. Richard told her he was unhappy in his marriage, that I was cold and boring and didn't understand him. He told her he was going to leave me as soon as he figured out the money situation. The money situation. I was the money situation. And Victoria knew everything. Not just knew, she had orchestrated it. I found emails between her and Jennifer dating back to before the affair even began. Victoria had introduced them at a charity gala. Victoria had encouraged Jennifer's interest. Victoria had coached her son on how to handle me, how to keep me compliant and unaware until he could secure access to my inheritance. She's weak, Victoria had written to Jennifer in one email. She'll sign anything he puts in front of her. Just be patient. What if she gets suspicious? Jennifer had asked. She won't. She's too stupid to see what's right in front of her. Just keep Richard focused on the goal. The goal was my money. The final piece of the puzzle came from Richard's laptop, which he had carelessly left open on his desk while he was in the shower. He was consulting with a divorce attorney, not to divorce me, but to understand how he could claim rights to my inheritance. He had been researching commingling of assets and fraudulent concealment and marital property rights in inherited wealth. He was planning to take everything I had. With his mother's help, with his mistress's patience, he was going to drain me dry and leave me with nothing. The old Amelia would have wept, would have confronted him tearfully and begged for an explanation, would have forgiven him again and again until there was nothing left of her to forgive. But the old Amelia was dead. She had died in Victoria's kitchen on Christmas night, killed by the words, "You smell like poverty." The woman who remained was someone new, someone harder, someone who had a plan. Victoria arrived for brunch the next morning wearing her most pleasant expression, like a snake pretending to be a bunny rabbit. She swept into our house with air kisses and exclamation of delight, as if Christmas had never happened, as if she hadn't called me poverty-scented to my face. "Amelia, darling, you look wonderful. Grease agreed with you. That tan is gorgeous. We simply must hear all about your little adventure." I smiled and poured her coffee. I had spent the morning preparing eggs Benedict with hollandaise made from scratch, fresh fruit arranged in an elegant display, champagne mimosas in crystal flutes. The perfect hostess, the perfect wife, the perfect fool. It was beautiful, I said. Very peaceful. I did a lot of thinking. I'm sure you did. Victoria sipped her coffee, her eyes sharp and calculating behind her pleasant mask. Richard tells me you've inherited some money from an uncle. How lovely for you. Unexpected windfalls can be such a blessing. Yes. Uncle Edward. He passed away last month. Edward Whitfield. I looked him up. Of course she had. Quite a fortune he accumulated. Hidden away in Maine all those years. Who would have guessed a retired professor could be so clever with money? He was a private person. Clearly. Victoria set down her cup. Amelia, I want to apologize for Christmas. I was under tremendous stress. The party planning, Harold's health issues, the pressure of hosting the entire family. I said things I didn't mean. Your family. You're Richard's wife. Of course you're welcome in my home. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. Thank you, Victoria. That means a lot to me. Good. Then we can put this unpleasantness behind us and move forward as a family. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Now, about your inheritance. Have you given any thought to what you'll do with it? $8 million is a significant sum. It requires careful management. I have some ideas. Richard mentioned something about investments. We have a wonderful family financial advisor who could help you manage the funds properly. It's so important to have professional guidance when dealing with large sums. The wrong decision could be devastating. You're absolutely right, I said. I was thinking the same thing. Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph. She thought she had me. She thought I was the same weak, malleable woman I had always been, just with a bigger bank account now. "We should set up a meeting," she said. "Richard and I can walk you through some options. Keep everything in the family, so to speak." That sounds perfect. Richard came downstairs then, freshly showered and eager. He kissed my cheek, something he hadn't done voluntarily in years, and sat down beside me, his hand covering mine on the table. "So, what did I miss? Are we making plans? Your mother was just suggesting we work with your family advisor on my inheritance," I said sweetly. "I think it's a wonderful idea." The look that passed between Richard and Victoria was pure predatory satisfaction. They thought they had their claws in me. They thought they had won. I poured more champagne all around and raised my glass. "To family," I said. "To family," they echoed. And the game began in earnest. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard was the perfect husband. He brought me flowers, roses, lilies, orchids, a different bouquet every few days. He cooked dinner, badly, burning the pasta and oversalting the sauce, but the effort was touching in its transparency. He complimented my appearance constantly, telling me I looked beautiful even when I had just woken up. He initiated intimacy for the first time in years, though I always found excuses to avoid it. "I'm tired. I have a headache. Let's wait until we're feeling closer." He accepted every excuse with patient understanding, the mask of devoted husband firmly in place. Meanwhile, I watched. I listened. I documented everything. The meetings with the family advisor began. His name was George Whitmore. I nearly laughed when I heard it, so close to Uncle Edward's surname. And he was, as I suspected, Victoria's personal attorney disguised as an investment consultant. He came to our house with a briefcase full of documents and a smile full of 2 white teeth. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, shaking my hand with practiced enthusiasm, "what a pleasure to finally meet you. Richard has told me so much about you." "Has he? All good things, I assure you." He sat down at our dining room table and began spreading papers with the air of someone who had done this many times before. "Now, I understand you've come into a significant inheritance. First, let me offer my condolences on the loss of your uncle. Second, congratulations. This is an exciting time for you and your family. Thank you. Now," he steepled his fingers, adopting what he probably thought was a wise expression. "Large sums of money attract attention. Legal challenges, tax complications, even fraud. The best way to protect yourself is to ensure your assets are properly structured within a secure framework. What would you recommend?" George launched into a long, complex explanation of trusts and LLCs and investment vehicles. Most of it was designed to confuse and overwhelm. Technical terms piled on top of technical terms, numbers and percentages thrown around like confetti. Richard nodded along as if he understood everything, though I could tell he was lost too. But the bottom line was simple. George wanted me to move my money into a joint account that Richard would manage. "For your protection," he explained. "If the assets are properly held within the marriage, they're shielded from outside claims. And Richard, as your spouse, can help you navigate any challenges that might arise." I nodded thoughtfully, pretending to consider. "This is a lot to take in. Can I see the paperwork?" "Of course." He slid a thick stack of documents across the table. "Take your time. Review them carefully. But I would recommend moving quickly. These things are time-sensitive, and the tax advantages decrease significantly after the end of the quarter." I smiled and took the papers. That night, after Richard had gone to sleep, I scanned every page and sent them to Marcus in Greece. His response came within hours. As suspected, these documents would transfer control of approximately $6 million to a joint account where Richard is listed as the primary signatory. You would maintain nominal ownership on paper, but he would have complete authority over all transactions. Additionally, there's a clause buried in the fine print, Section 14, Paragraph 3, that would make him the sole beneficiary of the entire account in the event of your death. Standard predatory structure. I've seen it 100 times. I stared at the email for a long moment. In the event of your death, I had known Richard was greedy. I had known he was unfaithful. But this was something darker. This was a man who was willing to steal not just my money, but potentially my future, my safety, my life. I called Marcus the next morning. I need different papers, I said. Papers that look identical to what George gave me, but do the opposite. What did you have in mind? I told him. When I finished, there was a long pause. You're certain? He asked. This is quite aggressive. If they discover the switch before the signing, they won't discover anything. They think I'm too stupid to read the fine print. They said so themselves. Very well. I'll draft the documents today and have them couriered to you tomorrow. They'll be formatted to look exactly like the originals. Same fonts, same headers, same paperweight. Only the substance will be different. Thank you, Marcus. Amelia? His voice softened. Whatever happens next, you're doing the right thing. These people were planning to take everything from you. They deserve whatever's coming. The substitution was easier than I expected. George's papers came in a distinctive blue folder with his firm's logo embossed on the cover. Whitmore Financial Solutions, it said in gold lettering. I found an identical folder at a legal supply store 2 towns over, where no one knew me. Marcus's documents were formatted to look exactly like the originals. Same fonts, same headers, same legal language on the first few pages. Only the substance was different. Where George's papers transferred my money to Richard, Marcus's papers did the opposite. They established that all of Richard's debts, the $900,000 in gambling losses, were his sole responsibility, not joint marital debt. They created a post-nuptial agreement that explicitly protected my inheritance as separate property, never to be commingled with marital assets. And they included a confession of financial fraud, specifically the concealment of significant debts during the marriage that Richard would sign without realizing it. The night before the signing, I carefully removed George's documents from their folder and replaced them with Marcus's. The switch was seamless, undetectable, perfect. I barely slept that night. The signing took place at our house, with George officiating and Victoria present as an eager witness. Richard was practically vibrating with excitement, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of husbandly concern. Are you sure about this, sweetheart? He asked, his hand on my shoulder. It's a big step. I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure. I smiled at him. I trust you, Richard. I trust all of you. Victoria beamed. George cleared his throat and began walking us through the documents. He explained each section in the same deliberately confusing terms he had used before. Rushing through the pages, he thought I wouldn't understand, lingering on the parts that made Richard look like a concerned protector. This section here, he said, pointing to a paragraph, establishes the joint management structure. Very standard, very protective. I nodded as if I understood and agreed. Finally, the moment came. If you'll just sign here, George said, pointing to the marked line, an initial here and here. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Wait, I said. I'd like witnesses. Official witnesses. Could you both sign as well? Just to make everything properly documented. George and Victoria exchanged glances. This wasn't standard procedure, but it wasn't unreasonable either. If anything, it made me look naive, eager to have everything official and proper. Of course, George said. Very thorough of you, Mrs. Thornton. I signed. Richard signed. George and Victoria signed as witnesses. When it was done, I felt something shift in the room. Something that none of them could sense, but that I felt in my bones like the turning of a tide. The trap had closed. There, Richard said, setting down the pen with a satisfied flourish. That wasn't so bad, was it? No, I agreed. It wasn't bad at all. Victoria suggested champagne to celebrate. We all raised our glasses to the future. And I watched them drink, watched them smile, watched them congratulate each other with their eyes. They thought they had won. They thought I had just signed away my fortune. But I had signed their destruction instead. After they left, I went upstairs and called Marcus. It's done, I said. They signed everything. Excellent. I'll file the documents with the court immediately. The postnuptial agreement is now legally binding in Connecticut. The debt transfer is recorded with the credit agencies, and the confession of financial fraud is on file and can be used in divorce proceedings. How long until they realize what they actually signed? They won't, not until you want them to. The documents look identical to what they expected. As far as they know, they got exactly what they wanted. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. You're welcome. Now, about your other matter. I finalized the sale of Villa Aegean this morning. The property is officially yours. All in your maiden name, completely separate from your marriage. I sat down on the edge of my bed, suddenly overwhelmed. It's real, I whispered. It's actually real. It's real. You own a hotel in Santorini. You've protected your assets. And whenever you're ready, you can begin the next chapter of your life. I thanked him again and ended the call. Then I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The next step would be the hardest. The next step would require witnesses, publicity, the complete and utter destruction of Richard and Victoria's carefully constructed world. I reached for my phone and began composing an invitation. You're cordially invited to a gratitude dinner, hosted by Amelia Thornton, black tie, the Grand Ballroom at Le Bernardin. Please join me as I express my appreciation for everyone who has supported me through this year's challenges. I sent it to 40 people. Richard's entire extended family, Victoria's social circle, the country club elite, everyone who had ever looked down on me, dismissed me, or treated me as invisible. They would all have front row seats to the show. The night of the dinner arrived. I had spent weeks planning every detail, working with the restaurant staff to ensure that everything would go exactly as I envisioned. The private ballroom at Le Bernardin glittered with candlelight and crystal, the tables draped in white linen, the walls hung with flowing fabric that gave the room an almost theatrical quality. A small platform had been set up at one end with a podium and a large projection screen. I had explained to the event coordinator that I would be showing a family slideshow, a celebration of memories. She had been happy to accommodate. I dressed carefully for the evening. A gown I had bought in Greece, midnight blue, silk that clung to my frame in all the right places, transforming me into someone I barely recognized. Real diamonds at my throat and ears, purchased with my own money for myself. My hair swept up in an elegant twist. My makeup flawless and dramatic. When Richard saw me descend the stairs, his eyes widened. You look... He seemed to struggle for words. Incredible. I've never seen you like this. Thank you. Is that dress new? And those diamonds? A gift to myself. I picked up my clutch from the hall table. Shall we go? We don't want to be late to my own party. Le Bernardin was magnificent. The ballroom was even more beautiful than I had imagined, and the guests were arriving in a steady stream of black tie elegance. I stood at the entrance greeting everyone, playing the gracious hostess, accepting compliments and air kisses and curious glances. Victoria arrived in red, as always, her power color. She swept through the room like a queen, greeting her friends and allies, basking in what she assumed would be my public submission. She had dressed to impress, clearly expecting to be the center of attention. Amelia, darling. She kissed my cheek, leaving a faint smear of lipstick. What a beautiful party. Everyone is so curious about your announcement. I hope I don't disappoint. I'm sure you won't. Her eyes glittered with anticipation. Richard tells me you have something special planned. Very special. Jennifer Ashford was there too, tucked into a corner table with some of Victoria's younger friends. She looked nervous, tugging at the hem of her dress, clearly uncertain why she had been invited. Richard kept glancing at her across the room, and each glance confirmed everything I had suspected about their relationship. The dinner was exquisite, course after course of perfect food, wine flowing freely, conversation buzzing with speculation. What would Amelia announce? An investment opportunity? A charitable foundation? A pregnancy? I let them wonder. I smiled and chatted and played the gracious hostess while the anticipation built like pressure in a sealed container. Finally, between the main course and dessert, I rose from my seat and walked to the platform. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by a small microphone clipped to my dress. "I've called this a gratitude dinner because I truly am grateful. Grateful for the clarity that this past year has brought me." Victoria nodded approvingly from her seat. Richard raised his glass. "I want to thank my husband Richard for 14 years of marriage." I paused. "He's taught me so much about loyalty." The screen behind me flickered to life. The first image was a photograph of Richard and Jennifer, sitting close together at a restaurant, his hand resting intimately on her thigh. The shot was unmistakable, intimate, damning. A gasp rippled through the room. "What?" Richard stood up, his face draining of color. "Amelia, what is this?" "Just a slideshow, darling, like I promised." The next image appeared, a text message exchange between Richard and Victoria. Richard: "She's getting suspicious. What do I do?" Victoria: "Keep her happy. The money is what matters." Richard: "What if she finds out about Jenny?" Victoria: "She won't. She's too stupid to see what's right in front of her." The room erupted in murmurs. Victoria stood up, her face crimson with rage. "This is doctored. This is fake. This is slander. How dare you?" I pressed the remote again. The next slide was an audio recording. I pressed play, and Victoria's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the ballroom. "You aren't welcome at my party. You smell like poverty. You're embarrassing my son." The Christmas conversation, every word preserved. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Wait," I said pleasantly. "There's more." The next slide showed an email from Victoria to Jennifer. "Once Richard secures the inheritance, you two can be together properly. Just be patient. She's weak. She'll sign anything he puts in front of her. Keep him focused on the goal." Jennifer burst into tears, mascara running down her face in black streams. She tried to leave, but the tables were packed close together and she couldn't find a path to the door. Her mother, one of Victoria's closest friends, was staring at Victoria with undisguised horror. "Amelia, please." Richard stumbled toward the platform. "This is insane. Let me explain." "Oh, I haven't gotten to the best part." I pressed the button again. The screen now displayed the documents from our signing session, but these were the real documents. Marcus's documents. "You see, Richard, you thought I was signing over control of my inheritance. What I actually signed was a post-nuptial agreement that protects every penny of my assets as separate property. And what you signed, you and your mother and your attorney, was a confession that you hid $900,000 in gambling debts during our marriage." The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. "Under Connecticut law," I continued, "concealing that level of debt from a spouse constitutes fraud. Financial fraud. In a divorce proceeding, it's grounds for an unequal distribution of assets. In my favor." Richard's face had gone from white to gray. He looked like he might collapse. "Additionally," I said, "the documents you signed transferred all of those debts from joint marital property to your sole responsibility. You owe $900,000. I owe nothing." "That's impossible," Richard whispered. "I read those papers. George said exactly what you wanted to hear. He didn't read the fine print either. None of you did." I smiled. "You were too busy celebrating." Victoria made a strangled sound and lunged toward the platform. Two guests, cousins of Richard's who had always been uncomfortable with Victoria's behavior, caught her arms and held her back. "And one final thing." I let the moment stretch, savoring it. "I've donated $100,000 to the Connecticut Women's Shelter in Victoria's name. The press release goes out tomorrow morning. Everyone in the state will know how much Victoria Thornton cares about struggling women." The irony was perfect. Victoria, who had told me I smelled like poverty, would be forever associated with helping impoverished women. Every gala, every benefit, every newspaper mention would remind people of her supposed generosity. She could never escape it. The shelter is already planning a dedication ceremony, I added. They're going to name a wing after you, Victoria. The Victoria Thornton Center for Women in Crisis. Isn't that lovely? Victoria made a sound that was somewhere between a scream and a sob. I looked out at the stunned faces of 40 guests, the elite of Connecticut society, witnessing the complete destruction of the Thornton family's carefully constructed facade. One final announcement, I said. Some of you may have seen my Instagram photos from Greece. The yacht, the sunset, the mysterious man in the background. Murmurs. Speculation. Richard's face twisted with jealous rage despite everything. The man was my attorney, Marcus Antonitis. We were reviewing the purchase of a property, a hotel actually, in Santorini. I pressed the remote one last time. A beautiful photograph appeared. Villa Aegean. White walls gleaming against the impossibly blue Aegean Sea. I bought it. With my own money. In my maiden name. It's called Villa Aegean, though I'm renaming it Hotel Edward, after the uncle who left me my inheritance. The uncle whose generosity made all of this possible. I stepped down from the platform and walked to where Richard stood, frozen in place like a man facing a firing squad. That hotel is where I'll be living from now on. I pulled a manila envelope from my clutch and placed it in his shaking hands. And these are divorce papers. I'd like you to sign them. Now. In front of all these witnesses. Richard stared at the envelope like it might burst into flames. If you'd prefer not to, I added quietly, I can show the next slideshow. The one with the details of your gambling addiction, the amounts, the dates, the casinos. I imagine your mother's friends would find that very interesting. And the bank that holds your business loans might be curious too. His hands shook as he opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the first page, the terms of the divorce, which left him with essentially nothing. I can't sign this, he whispered. You're taking everything. You were going to take everything from me first. You were planning for if something happened to me. I leaned closer, my voice dropping so only he could hear. But you made a mistake, Richard. You forgot that I was watching. You forgot that I was smart. You forgot that the woman you married wasn't the woman you tried to destroy. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He was finally seeing me, the real me, the woman he should have been afraid of all along. Sign, I said. He signed. Victoria collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her friends had moved away from her, creating a visible circle of empty space. The social distancing had already begun. I retrieved the signed divorce papers and tucked them back into my clutch. Thank you all for coming to my gratitude dinner, I said to the room at large. I am truly grateful for the clarity. Then I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind. The elevator doors closed, and I was alone. I looked at myself in the mirrored walls. This woman in midnight blue, with diamonds at her throat and fire in her eyes. I barely recognized her. She was someone new. Someone who had been buried for 14 years and had finally clawed her way back to the surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Watching the social media reactions from here. It's already trending. How do you feel? I typed back, like I can finally breathe. His response came immediately. The hotel is ready whenever you are. Greece is waiting? I smiled and stepped out into the cold January night. Behind me, I could hear the chaos. Victoria's shrieks, Richard's desperate attempts at damage control, the scandalized whispers of 40 witnesses who would spread this story to everyone they knew by morning. Let them talk. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a hotel I had booked weeks ago, anticipating this night. Tomorrow, I would begin arranging my affairs. In a week, I would fly to Greece, and Victoria Thornton would have to live with her name on a shelter for impoverished women for the rest of her miserable life. The cab pulled away from the curb, and I watched the lights of the city slide past the window. I was Amelia Whitfield now, owner of a hotel, survivor of a marriage, destroyer of those who had underestimated her, and I was just getting started. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Richard's attorney, a different one than George, who had quietly withdrawn from the case when he realized his own liability, tried everything. He claimed the documents were forged. He claimed I had manipulated Richard into signing under duress. He claimed the post-nuptial agreement was invalid because Richard hadn't understood what he was signing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses from the dinner were more than willing to provide statements. The original documents, with Richard's signature clearly visible, were filed with the court. And the gambling debts, now a matter of public record, painted a picture of a man who had been lying to everyone, including himself, for years. In the end, the judge was not sympathetic to Richard's arguments. The post-nuptial agreement was upheld. The debt transfer was validated. And the divorce was granted with terms that left Richard with almost nothing. He got the car, a 3-year-old BMW that he still owed money on. He got his personal belongings. He got the right to visit his mother in her basement, which was where he would be living for the foreseeable future. I got everything else. The house, which I promptly sold. The joint savings, minus the amount Richard had secretly withdrawn over the years. And most importantly, my inheritance remained completely intact, protected by the post-nuptial agreement and confirmed as separate property by the court. The gambling debts stayed his sole responsibility. The collection agencies began their pursuit immediately, and Richard, who had never worked a real job in his life, found himself facing financial ruin with no safety net and no one to blame but himself. Victoria fared even worse in some ways. The shelter donation had been announced with great fanfare, just as I had planned. The Hartford Courant ran a story about Victoria's generous gift to women in crisis. The local news did a segment. The shelter's director gave an interview praising Victoria's commitment to helping the most vulnerable members of our community. Victoria couldn't disown the donation without looking like a monster. She couldn't embrace it without choking on the irony. She was trapped in her own generosity, forced to attend benefits and give speeches about empowering struggling women, while her former friends whispered about her cruelty behind her back. The country club board asked her to step back from her position. Her bridge group stopped inviting her. Her closest friends, including Jennifer Ashford's mother, who was mortified by her daughter's role in the scandal, cut ties entirely. Jennifer herself disappeared from Connecticut society, rumored to have moved to California to escape the gossip. Richard, of course, couldn't follow her. He didn't have the money for a plane ticket, let alone a cross-country move. Mother and son were left with nothing but each other, 2 snakes in a pit they had dug themselves. I learned all of this secondhand through occasional news articles and the rare update from Patricia, Richard's aunt, who had reached out after the dinner to express her quiet support. "I always knew something was wrong with that family," she wrote. "I'm just sorry it took this for everyone else to see it." By the time the divorce was final, I was already in Greece watching the renovation of my hotel. Villa Aegean, soon to be Hotel Edward, was transformed over the following months. I worked with local craftsmen and designers, people who understood the traditional Cycladic architecture and could help me preserve its beauty while adding modern comforts. We restored the white walls to their original brilliance. We replaced the crooked blue shutters with new ones, hand-painted in the traditional shade. We rebuilt the terrace and added infinity pools that seemed to merge with the caldera. Each of the 12 rooms was given a name based on Greek mythology: Athena, the goddess of wisdom; Aphrodite, the goddess of love; Persephone, who emerged from the underworld to bring spring; Hera, the queen who endured betrayal and emerged stronger. The common areas were filled with comfortable furniture in shades of white and cream and soft blue. Local artists contributed paintings and sculptures that reflected the island's history and beauty. A small library was stocked with books in multiple languages, including a collection of poetry that Uncle Edward had loved. I renamed the hotel Hotel Edward, and I had his letter framed and hung in the lobby. Guests often stopped to read it, and more than one told me it brought tears to their eyes. Marcus helped with all the legal complexities: permits, licenses, business registration, residency applications. He became more than an attorney over those months. He became a trusted friend, a steady presence in my new life. And perhaps, eventually, something more. Though neither of us rushed to define it. We had time. We had all the time in the world. I decided early on that I wanted to specialize in a particular kind of guest. Women starting over, women leaving bad marriages, escaping controlling partners, rebuilding their lives from the ashes of who they used to be. I partnered with organizations that help domestic violence survivors, offering discounted stays and employment opportunities for women who needed a fresh start. The hotel became a sanctuary, a place where women could rest and heal and remember who they were before the world tried to diminish them. The bookings filled quickly. Word spread through travel blogs and women's networks, and quiet recommendations from one survivor to another. By the end of the first season, we had a waiting list 6 months long. My mother came to visit in the spring. We had been estranged for years. Not dramatically, not with arguments or ultimatums, but in the quiet way that happens when someone slowly disappears from their own life. Richard had isolated me from everyone who loved me, and I had let him, too exhausted and diminished to fight. But after the divorce, I had reached out. A letter first, then a phone call, then an invitation. My mother had responded with tears and forgiveness and a plane ticket purchased before I could offer to pay. She stood on the terrace of Hotel Edward, looking out at the same view that had taken my breath away months before. The caldera sparkled in the afternoon sun. The white buildings of Oya cascaded down the cliffs like frozen waterfalls. Somewhere below, a fairy horn sounded and church bells rang in the distance. "Your uncle would be so proud," she said quietly. "He always knew you were special, Amelia. Even when you were a little girl, he could see something in you that others missed." I wish I had visited him more. I wish I had kept in touch. He understood. He knew you. "We're trapped, even if you didn't realize it yourself." She turned to look at me, her eyes bright with tears. "Are you happy now?" I considered the question seriously. Happy was a complicated word. It implied an absence of struggle, a state of pure contentment that felt impossible after everything I had been through. "I'm at peace," I said finally. "I'm building something meaningful. I'm helping people who need it, and I'm free." She hugged me tight, and I let myself be held like I was a child again. "That's all I ever wanted for you," she whispered. "That's all any mother wants." My sister came too, later in the summer, bringing her children, my nieces and nephew, who I had barely seen over the past decade. They were strangers at first, these small humans who shared my blood, but children have a way of breaking through awkwardness. Within days, they were running wild through the hotel, charming guests with their laughter and their endless energy. The family I had lost began to return piece by piece, relationship by relationship. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, and there were conversations that still needed to happen, apologies that still needed to be made. But it was real. It was mine. And it was enough. 8 months after the gratitude dinner, I stood on the terrace of Hotel Edward at sunset. The caldera was painted in shades of gold and pink and deep purple. The white buildings of Oya glowed like something from a dream. Below me, guests gathered in the garden for the evening wine reception, their laughter drifting up on the warm Mediterranean air. My hotel, my guests, my life. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my linen dress. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Richard, blocked. Another call from my ex-husband, joining the dozens of others I had never answered. I didn't know what he wanted anymore. Money, probably, or perhaps just the satisfaction of knowing he could still reach me. Perhaps he wanted to apologize, or to rage, or to beg. I didn't care enough to find out. I silenced the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. A car was pulling up to the hotel entrance. a new guest arriving for a week-long stay. I watched as a woman stepped out of the taxi, mid-40s, dressed in traveling clothes that looked like they had been chosen in a hurry, a single suitcase in her hand. Even from this distance, I recognized the expression on her face. It was the look of someone who had just escaped, someone who was terrified and exhausted and hopeful all at once. I knew that expression intimately. I had worn it myself not so long ago. I walked down the winding path to meet her. "Welcome to Hotel Edward," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Amelia, the owner. You must be Sarah." She nodded, her eyes already filling with tears. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. It's been a very long journey to get here." "I understand completely." I took her hand in both of mine. "You're safe. Now, whatever you're running from, it can't reach you here. Let me show you to your room. It has the best view of the sunset." She tried to smile, but the tears kept coming. I put my arm around her shoulders and led her inside, past the lobby with Uncle Edward's framed letter, past the small library with its comfortable chairs, past the terrace where other guests were gathering with glasses of wine. Later that night, after Sarah had settled in and the other guests had retired to their rooms, I sat alone on my private terrace with a glass of local wine. The stars were brilliant overhead, more stars than I had ever seen in Connecticut, where light pollution washed the sky into a dim gray haze. Here, the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river of light. The sea was calm and black, and somewhere in the distance, a ship's light moved slowly across the horizon. I thought about Victoria's words on that Christmas night, words that had seemed so devastating at the time, words that had broken me open and set me free. "You smell like poverty." I breathed in the night air, salt and jasmine and thyme, and something else, something that smelled like contentment, and smiled. I didn't smell like poverty anymore. I smelled like the sea, like expensive wine, like fresh linen and Mediterranean herbs and hard-won freedom. But more than that, I smelled like something Victoria would never understand, something Richard had never valued, something Uncle Edward had seen in me all along. I smelled like a woman who had finally discovered her own worth. I raised my glass to the stars. "Thank you, Uncle Edward," I whispered. I finally saw Santorini, and I finally saw myself. The wine was crisp and cold. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. The waves whispered against the caldera walls far below, and somewhere in Connecticut, in a basement that smelled of mothballs and regret, a man who had once told his wife she smelled like poverty was learning what it truly meant to have nothing. Justice, I had discovered, was best served not cold but warm. Warm as a Greek sunset, sweet as island wine, lasting as the memory of everything they had lost. They had wanted my money, they got nothing. They had dismissed me as worthless. Now I owned the sunset, and every woman who walked through the doors of Hotel Edward would learn what I had learned. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It is determined by you. The night was quiet. The stars were bright. The sea stretched out before me like a promise. And Amelia Whitfield, owner of Hotel Edward, survivor of betrayal, architect of her own salvation, was finally, completely, irrevocably home.